not just your own personal situation when you talk about that. I guess the other thing I would suggest, the talking points here about Pitt are very good. And I know the source because I was at the Chancellor's press conference, but they are very reasonable. A couple of things I would suggest. One is, don't just talk about Pitt or the state-related universities. The cuts are affecting all of higher education. Community college is being cut. The support to the private institutions is being cut. There's a thing called institutional assistance grants, which is $30 million pool of money in the current budget that was shared by the private universities. That's been cut by 50% as well. Now, that doesn't look like necessarily a huge number compared to some of the cuts to Pitt or something like that, but to the small private institutions, that can be a very critical amount of money to keep them solvent. So those are kinds of things to keep in mind. Fortunately, it doesn't look like there's been too much done to FIA and to the financial aid situation in Pennsylvania. They're looking at about a 2% cut right now, and honestly, nobody's going to be able to argue that they should get less than that, because with the size of the cuts going on, 2% is really pretty much almost steady state funding. So that, in terms of financial aid, it's more the direct support to the institutions that's being taken out of the governor's budget. There is some very strong support among the Democrats who are very unhappy with the governor's approach towards education. At the other side of that coin, there are some Republicans who are saying education has been a fat cat for too long. It's time that they shared some of the pain. Part of that is just a lack of knowledge. They don't know that, in fact, many institutions have, in fact, been going through cutbacks and cutting costs in the past 6 to 10 years. There's many institutions who've had salary freezes already for 1, 2, sometimes 3 years for employees at their institutions. So it's not as if the colleges are just willy-nilly expanding and spending money. The fact is, most college costs are personnel costs. More than half of any budget, usually at any higher education institution, is in faculty and staff. And it's a competitive world. If you want the best faculty to teach your students so that they will be best prepared for the future, you're going to have to pay the most money. And there is, though, a lingering perception on the part of many that faculty members have an easy life. They come in 3 hours a week and they make 6-figure salaries, and that's all that they do. So that's a sort of a public perception that has to be kind of taken on, and we will be doing that as we move forward. Kind of ironic is that the general public probably thinks about the same of the legislators in terms of what they do as they do about university faculty, but that's another issue. I would suggest when you go and talk to these legislators, try to keep to one issue. If you're talking to a transportation committee member, talk transportation. If you're talking to an appropriations committee member, or just your legislator who's not on either of those committees, then pick one topic, whether it be by higher ed funding or transportation. And now, that doesn't mean they won't ask you about the other things. More than likely, you're going to get questions about what do you think about the higher ed budget, because you're college students, and that's what they're going to expect. Keep in mind that your effort is one of a number that are going on. The day before, there will be students from Pitt up there talking to legislators. Another reason, then, for you to not just talk about the University of Pittsburgh, but to talk more in general about higher education and how problems in one sector affects all sectors. And I think that's an approach that you can take, because they'll probably have heard, a lot of them will have heard directly from Pitt students about what it means to the University of Pittsburgh. So to hear another perspective in terms of what it means to your institution, and you might check with some folks at your school to see what they've decided might be the possibility, what might happen. There's some interesting statistics, and I'll send Neil the link. The Chronicle of Higher Ed just did a study about the per capita support for the flagship state institution in all of the country. And Penn State was the one they used as an example because it is indeed the flagship state institution. Pennsylvania ranks 49th out of 50 states currently in terms of the per capita support for students at their flagship state institutions. That's before any cuts take place. One of the problems, though, is and I would have some quarrel with the approach that Penn State has taken. It looks like they're threatening, and that's not a good way to get legislators to compromise. They feel pressured, they feel, Penn State's threat to close some branch campuses was not well received by the legislature. I can tell you that as a fact. What is more well received is the approach that Mark Nordenberg took and others are taking to demonstrate the value that the state gets for the dollars they invest in their state universities or the state system or the community college or the private colleges. Pennsylvania relies much more heavily than most states on private colleges to pick up the slack, if you will, in terms of education, because realistically, the state system and the state relateds do not have the capacity to just take all the other students currently studying in Pennsylvania and be able to educate them. There just is not the ability to do that. And that's a conscious decision that Pennsylvania has done over the years. They started that institutional assistance grant program in 1975, and it's more or less a similar one when Pitt and Temple and the others became state-related. The deal was you get state support, you keep tuition lower for in-state students. That's the same basic premise of the institutional assistance grants, that it helps keep tuition lower for the in-state students who are going to the private colleges and universities. And that's kind of it. There's no real magic in terms of the funding. We have to acknowledge there are going to be cuts. There's just not enough money to fund everything. One of the approaches is to say schools have done things already to try to contain costs, but the public sees increases in tuition every year. They don't relate those to the fact that state subsidies have been declining over the years, and that's part of why those tuitions are going up. And they don't necessarily want to hear that. You also have created, you haven't, but the government has created a situation where they've almost put basic education in conflict with higher education. The cuts to K through 12 are so severe also that people are concerned about those. And they're inevitably worried that one of the ways that those cuts are going to be made up is increased local municipal property taxes. And while the governor will be able to maintain his pledge of no new state taxes, it does not mean that the residents of Pennsylvania will not see new taxes, because more than likely they will. Just kind of some tangential issues, you may be asked about the Marcellus Shale tax as a possible source of revenue. The governor has indicated under no circumstances will he tax Marcellus Shale extraction. The Democratic caucus, I can tell you, is very much in favor of that as a possibility, not to solve everything, but kind of saying, why are we leaving hundreds of millions of dollars in the ground when we could be using it to help our budget situation, to help education, to help welfare, to help whatever. So that's going to be an ongoing discussion. One of the things that has happened already, if you read the papers and watch some of the editorials and things, the news media is making a close connection between the contributions to Governor Corbett's election campaign from the Marcellus Shale industry and the fact that he refuses to levy a tax on them. So that's one area. Another area that may come up, it's kind of, but Pennsylvania is one of only 2 states in the nation that does not tax smokeless tobacco. Again, if you're looking for ways in which to suggest to legislators that they could, in fact, generate some new revenue, that not only generates revenue, but that's a public health issue as well. Same as with increasing taxes on cigarettes, increasing taxes on smokeless tobacco, discourages people from using it, and that does have a positive health impact on the Commonwealth. So that's something as well that could be looked at. I would suggest when you go in to talk to the legislators, you're not going to have all the answers, but presenting them with a couple of alternatives or asking them how they feel about taxing Marcellus Shale or smokeless tobacco or where they see the answers are. And one of the things you can do as you leave is ask them how you could help them. What would they like to see you do to help, especially with the ones who are sympathetic to trying to either fund transportation or fund education. Ask them, tell them you'd like to stay in touch, you'd like to be involved. How can you help? What should be your next step? I mean, they like to give advice, so it's a good opportunity to kind of cement that relationship as well and to indicate to them that you're there to help them out.